Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We'll be getting started in just a moment. We're just admitting everyone to the webinar right now. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. We're just admitting everyone to the webinar. We'll be getting started in just a moment. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers. We're broadcasting today from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. As always, we're delighted to partner with our friends at the Prairie Garden Committee to celebrate the 2024 Prairie Garden, dedicated to year-round gardening. You'll be hearing from a number of the contributors, as well as both the editor of the Prairie Garden and this year's guest editor in just a moment. Just a few quick notes before we begin. Imperfect auto-generated subtitles are available just by pressing the CC button at the bottom if you're having trouble hearing. In addition, there was also a live chat, so feel free to offer any comments you might have, and I'll pass those along to the speakers later on following the event. There will also be a time for questions. So as questions occur to you, please feel free to write those in the Q&A box. That's just at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can write a question in there at any point, and when it comes time for the Q&A, we'll then address today's panelists. Now, we also have, of course, as a bookseller, many copies of the Prairie Garden at our store, so please do visit, stop by, order a copy online, give us a call, and we'll find a way to put this incredibly valuable resource into your hands. But now, I'd like to turn things over to the editor of the Prairie Garden, Evelyn Lundeen, who'll tell you a little bit about what's in store.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the launch of the 85th edition of the Prairie Garden, called Year-Round Gardening, as John has already mentioned to you. I'm Evelyn Lundeen. I am the editor for the Prairie Garden. We've been around since 1937, and we've published every year, save for the years of the Second World War, where there was a pause in our publication. We are all volunteers, and all of us contribute in terms of either editing or adding articles to the edition on a yearly basis. We're Western Canada's only annual publication for gardening. And while we are published in Winnipeg, our reach goes all across Canada. And now we are also going down into the northern United States. And it is collectively all the authors who contribute the articles, pictures, and other material that makes us so successful, along with, of course, our sponsors and you, our loyal readers. This year, its focus is on gardening activities indoors, particularly during the period when it's wintertime, when we can't get out and garden outside. We're happy to see the gardening catalog start showing up in mid-February in our computer inboxes and in the mail. But we can't actually get our hands back in the soil, at least for a couple of months. So there's a total of 57 articles in this year's edition covering different aspects of our theme, as well as a lot of general gardening information that will be of interest to everyone. Authors today will include Cheryl Mormado, who will instruct you on growing microgreens, Kelly Liask from Prairie Originals, who has an article talking about how to grow native plants from seeds, and Erna Buffy espouses on the important role including trees in the landscape. We are also happy to welcome Dr. Evans of Evans Cherry fame, and he will be contributing an article on apples and raspberries. And this is just a sample of all the different types of articles that you're going to be able to find in this year's edition. Now, each year, the Garden Committee invites a guest editor to join us, and I'm very pleased to say that Barbara Shields has agreed to join us this year. Barb is a retired tax lawyer, and she's passionate about roses and anything regarding to knitting. She's no stranger to the Prairie Garden, and she will be telling us a little about miniature roses and how to grow those. So go ahead, Barb, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I just want to make sure I can be heard and seen.
You were good to go, Barb.
Great, great. Welcome, everybody, to the book launch. I'm not going to repeat anything that Evelyn had to say, except, of course, I'm very excited and very honored to be here as the guest editor. And I've been asked to talk about my passion, which is roses. I'll give you some basic information on how to grow them in a minute, but just to give you an idea, a little bit more about me. Last couple of days, I've thought very carefully about why I adore roses. And I think it's probably because it's a combination of things. One is my passion for collecting things, starting from when I was a little girl collecting stamps, and my passion for history, because roses come through history in so many different ways. They're mentioned in novels, they're named in songs, and we all know roses are the go-to flower for romance. And finally, when it came time to putting a garden together, I kind of like the idea that I can have such a huge variety of one type of plant available to me. So that's why I got into growing roses. Now, the first thing that I almost always hear from someone when we talk about roses is the fact that, oh, they're difficult to grow. I would get roses, but I just can't do this. They're just too much work. And I think many of you have probably heard from me before when I say roses are not that difficult to grow. They're a lovely perennial. They can be treated as an annual if you fall in love with a rose that's just not quite right for our zone. But nevertheless, since I treat mine as perennials, I do my very best to keep them from year to year. And here's the most important element. I know when we pick up a rose at the nursery or wherever, you typically see the plant sitting in the pot, and then you see the big kind of a nubbly bit. I always refer to as that. But it's actually where the stems and the stems and the roots come together, and it's called the bud union. That needs to be 4 inches down in the ground. Even the Canadian roses, I would suggest you would want to plant them deeply. That gives them the much better protection for the winter. The bud union is the part of the rose that has to survive in our climate. If the tops of the rose bushes freeze off and you're looking at them and thinking, oh, I've lost the rose, the part that's going to be essential to you is going to be the bud union. I have to tell you, every spring, one of my first special moments is when I start to unpack my roses and I discover the green shoots at the very, very bottom. Because if there's the slightest bound of green, I'm confident that I will have that rose bush this summer. So I can't stress enough the need to do that. The second piece of advice I would give you is prune your roses in the spring, not the fall, because one of the best insulators for the roses is going to be the snow that we get. If it's a very delicate rose, then you may want to think of some winter protection. I use the leaves from the many trees on our property, and in some instances I add burlap. But if you're looking at some of the many choices you have from the Canadian roses, then you don't have to go to the same lengths to get the winter protection. I said when I started this that one of the things is that I'm a collector. So I'm not sure at this point whether it's 115 or 125 rose bushes in the yard, plus the miniature roses that I'm trying to overwinter. But that gives you an indication of how I collect roses. And the wonderful thing about roses is that you can decide to create your own mini collections. And here's some suggestions on what you might think about. First of all, if you want a garden that is very fragrant, one of the things you'd like to have is a selection of roses, obviously, that give off fragrance. In that case, I can make some suggestions, one of which is the Oscar Peterson rose, which is a part of the Canadian Artist series. There's also a white rose called Blanc Double Goubert, also very fragrant. There's the Hansa rose, which is a deep, almost a magenta pink, which is very fragrant. And there's several others if you want to look up, but those are the ones that come to mind that are all hardy for here in Canada, here in Manitoba. Unfortunately, most of the roses that we call the the Morden roses and or Parkland roses and the Explorer series tend to be only lightly fragrant. So you may have to be checking very carefully to find out whether these are what additional roses will work for you. But that's one type of collection. The other types of collections you can do, you may select by color and decide, you know, I really want to have a red rose garden, in which case you might want to look at such roses as Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Emily Carr, L.D. Braithwaite, or Tessa the D'Urbervilles. Now, the first one I mentioned is one of the more tender roses, but it will survive with protection. The second one I mentioned, and the final two that I mentioned, I should say, are David Austin roses. Emily Carr is the first of the Canadian Artist series. They're all red roses. So that's the second possibility. Maybe you want to collect by color. I'm a bit more eclectic. I like a little of everything everywhere. So my garden is a mixture of white, yellow, apricot, pale pink, orange, pink, medium pink, dark pink, red. It's not exactly what you call an organized by color type of property. The other thing you can do is collect some of the series of roses that we have. There are the Parkland roses, which are the Morden developed roses. And you can look at anything from Morden Sunrise, which is a lovely sort of peachy yellow, to Winnipeg Parks, which starts out red and tends to fade in the sunlight towards pink. Most of the Morden roses are going to, in fact, be various shades of pink. And there's a lot of them, so I'm not going to go through all of them. They're listed off for the most part of the 2008 issue of Prairie Garden. There's also the Canadian Explorer series, which were developed down in Eastern Canada. And it's quite simple. They're named for basically Canadian explorers. There's everything from Henry Hudson, which is white, up to Captain Samuel Holland, which is a climbing rose, which is a very deep pink verging on red. So if you want to collect as a series, the Canadian Explorer series can be very useful. There's also the Canadian Artist series. Now, this one's manageable if you want to have a collection because it only consists of 5 roses. Emily Carr, which is a deep, deep red. Felix Leclerc, which is a deep rose pink. Bill Reed, which is a yellow. Campfire, which is interesting because it's a combination of yellow and white and pink. And Oscar Peterson. Emily Carr, of course, is named for the West Coast artist. Felix Leclerc for a great music composer and musician from Quebec. Bill Reed was famous for the totem poles that he carved. Campfire is actually in honor of Tom Thompson. And Oscar Peterson, of course, is famous for his jazz, as a jazz musician. As I said, Oscar Peterson, very, very fragrant rose. Then with the cancellation of the rose experimental programs at Morden and in Ottawa, we now have roses that are being developed as what's called the 49th parallel roses. And they consist of Canadian Shield, which is red, Aurora Borealis, which is a deep pink with kind of a gold center, the Chinook Sunrise, which is a blush that goes slightly darker and has kind of a yellow and pink center, which, by the way, Chinook Sunrise won the 2020 International Gold Medal. And the Yukon Sun, which came out this year, or last year, I should say, and it's yellow. So those are collections of 4 and collections of 5. So if your garden doesn't lend itself to being crazy like I am and with 125 bushes, those are collections that are sort of a manageable number. Another possibility, and this is me with having a series of mini collections. I also have a collection of roses that are named for people. I'm not talking about the explorers, but for example, there's the Marilyn Monroe rose, which is a creamy apricot, sort of I guess you'd call it a blonde. Dolly Parton, which is red, orange, and copper, which is an unusual color combination. Julie Andrews, deep pink. Karl Lagerfeld, very pale mauve. Queen Elizabeth, red. Lady Di, deep pink. Ingrid Bergman, dark red. Toulouse-Lautrec and Maurice Utrillo are both named for French Impressionist painters. Toulouse-Lautrec is yellow. Maurice Utrillo is a red, yellow, and very colorful. It almost looks like the pom-pom you would see with a cheerleader or the top of a knitted hat. And finally, I put a star beside Archbishop Desmond Tutu because of all the roses that I have that are for named people. I actually had met Archbishop Desmond Tutu, so it's kind of extra magical for me that I have a rose in his memory. Those are ideas. Some people collect the David Austin roses. I think most of you that know me know that I love the David Austin roses. They're a little hardier than the hybrid tea and the more delicate roses, but not quite as hardy as the Canadian roses. So they're really, you have to consider when you get David Austin roses that you're going to need to give them extra protection. But having said that, the oldest David Austin rose in my garden is 20 years old. It's a red rose called LD Braithwaite. And I have several other roses in the garden, but they all take every single year the extra care and attention to make sure they survive. I don't suggest for people who are trying roses for the first time that they're going to want to do something like that. I also sometimes get asked about climbing roses. There are many good Canadian climbing roses, Captain Samuel Holland, John Davis, John Cabot. There's a new one called Above and Beyond, which is, I haven't found to be as reliable as the ones that I gave to you. And personally, I'm going to try to get my hands on a rose from a hybrid rose from the Maritimes called Irene, which is a hybrid of two of the Canadian Explorer series. It's a white climbing rose, and with any luck, I'll be able to get it this year and try it out for my garden. At present, I have climbing roses of John Davis, John Cabot, Samuel Holland, sort of the usual ones. I hope. Anyways, I've gone through a whole list of roses and I spoke very, very quickly. But if I understand this is being taped, recorded, so that if you look over the YouTube, you'll have an opportunity to, with me speaking as quickly as I do, you'll have an opportunity to maybe take some notes from that. There are several good books available on roses to give you some ideas. The one thing you need to watch out for, though, is because roses come into fashion, go out of fashion, that some of the books that are available will really be considered to be out of date by the time you purchase them. It's difficult to keep up on what's available as the roses change. For example, I discovered today one of the roses, David Austin roses in my garden. It's called Grace, is no longer being produced. So I'm kind of proud of the fact that I may have one of the few surviving roses from that particular group. I've spoken about everything in terms of types of roses. Let's just briefly talk about what I spoke at the beginning about how to plant them. Now, in planting a rose 4 inches in, make sure that the hole is big enough for the roots. Don't put any fertilizer into the hole other than potentially some bone meal. There's an old superstition that says that you can't plant a rose where a rose has died. I take the view that I can do that because most of the time our roses don't die from disease. They typically die from the cold. So I'm not unduly concerned that when I replace a rose with another rose, and I haven't found that to be an actual situation. So big enough hole so the roots can expand, and no fertilizer. I can also recommend, if you're going to get seriously into growing roses, or if you're going to get seriously into planting shrubs, there is a particular shovel or spade, I should say, that you can get from Lee Valley, which means that I can put a rose bush into the ground in 5 minutes. I can dig the hole in 5 minutes. It's called a transplant spade, so you might want to check it out if you're getting seriously into growing roses, as I have. Then once they're planted, needless to say, roses need a significant amount of water. They don't really like intense heat. So if they're going to be in an area that is very, very sunny, you're going to want to make sure that they have a good soaking of raw water on a regular basis. You really cannot let the roots dry out. So that means making sure they get a good soaking, preferably first thing in the morning. As far as fertilizing roses, I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I'm not into using chemicals. So I think a few people have heard me speak on this topic. I use coffee grounds and I use banana peels. I've added to that giving them a dose about twice a year of Epsom salts, because Epsom salts is to encourage blossom and also to strengthen the stalks. But the most reliable I've found from a feeding point of view has been to give them the coffee grounds and the banana peels, because of the potassium in the case of the banana peels, which is useful for the roses. Then, as I've said, in the fall, I use all the leaves off my yard. I simply put them on top of all of my roses. Where the few of them that I have that are more delicate, those are the ones that I give burlap to. But otherwise, I just wait for the spring, and hopefully that wonderful morning when I start to unpack the roses and discover that I've got just about all of them left from the year before. I think that's everything that I have to say today. If there's anything else, please feel free to put something into the questions. And then we're in a position to talk about any questions that need to be answered. Over to you.
Thank you, Barb, for your presentation on roses. And obviously, you're very, very knowledgeable and you've given us some information. Now, I'd like to introduce Norm Sylvestre. Norm is originally from Saskatchewan, but has settled in Manitoba, where he started gardening and was fighting the prairie gumbo that is so famous in this area. So he was looking for something he could do to solve that problem, and came upon an old German horticultural technique called hugelkultur. Now, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and if not, Norm, I'm sure you'll correct me in a moment there. That will be the basis of his presentation today. So, Norm, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Evelyn. This goes back to the time when I first bought this property. There was 2 gardens here, and hadn't gardened for a long time. So, attempting to start a garden, I forced my planting, and for the first time in a long time, I experienced something I'd never experienced before. It was just the clay soil. So I went ahead and did some research because all my plants are dying. And I came across, after spending many, many hours on YouTube and Google, I came across something called hugelkultur. Now, hugelkultur actually goes back hundreds of years in Eastern Europe and Germany, but nothing was really written about it until about 1960s. And after that, it was picked up by a permaculture advocate called Norm Sylvestre. And his student actually introduced it in the States in around the 70s, 80s. Now, after looking at YouTube videos over and over again, I decided to actually try doing this as a raised bed, because originally, when they first came out with hugelkultur, they're actually just mounted wood and then covered with dirt on top. So what I did is actually, I'm sure it was done in other places because it's all over YouTube as well. What I did is I went out and I bought myself a chainsaw mill, and I accessed a cedar telephone poles for my structure to build. I brought in a backhoe and I dug down 3 feet below ground, 3 feet wide by 27 feet long. And then from all the instructions, what you do is you put the fresher wood on the bottom. And then after that, as you're coming out, one thing that's very important is you make sure that all your cavities are packed down tight. You got to pack it tight, because you don't want your topsoil going down over time, or minimize it anyways. So as you're coming up, wood is your carbon, so you pack it tight. With nitrogen would be your probably coffee grounds, kitchen scraps. Obviously, the bulk would be grass. As I came up, I built my structure around. I made my 3-foot raised bed around there. Kept putting up logs. On the very, very top, I put absolutely dead logs, something that would crumble in your hand, and twigs. On top of that, I added, about 4 to 6 inches of a 5-way mix I got from Marmer Soils, and I mixed in mushroom compost. So now in this bed, I have complete control over it now. I didn't have to fight with the soil I had to before, because a big rain would come and my peas were sitting in sitting in water. All my raspberry plants were dying. I was taking out carrots with a spade. I broke a spade. So anyways, now I got this point. I actually went further into that. I started studying other gardeners. Probably the one that comes to mind the most, one that I follow the most, is a gentleman called Charles Dowding out of the UK. Now he does something very different that most gardeners do not do. He practices no-dig gardening. So at the very beginning when I started this, I was very nervous going to straight compost for fertilizing my beds. So at the beginning, what I was doing, I was using, like everybody else says, go to your local nursery, pick up your fertilizer and use fertilizer. And then I moved to organic fertilizer after that. Now, Charles Downing, the only thing he uses is compost. So being nervous first year, I built my own compost bin. And on my first year, I went strictly to compost. And it was actually incredible. Nothing dropped a beat. My plants were totally healthy. Put in my pepper plants, I'd dig a hole. I would put in maybe a handful of leaf mold. I would put in some homemade compost. For my carrot beds and all my other beds, I'd put maybe 1 inch or 2 of compost. And it was actually incredible what happened. So getting back to hugelkultur, there's some things that I must say are difficult. And that's probably the biggest thing is actually the construction of it. I love actually, I got 5 beds, 4 feet by 27 feet long. And I'm in the process of building another 5 to 10 right now. But the biggest thing is the labor involved. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Probably another thing is you have to make sure, I'll say it again because it's important. Where you're putting your logs in, make sure you pack the cavities tight. Because once that soil is on top, you've got your 4 or 5 inches on top, and I put mushroom compost on top of that. The soil will want to go down. But because I was so careful, I say right now, I haven't filled it probably in 6 years. I'd say from the top of my bed, it's gone down maybe 4 inches. But at the same time saying that, one bed I wasn't that careful with. And what happened is that whole side of it just completely went down. I lost soil, like went straight down. There was a hole about probably a foot in diameter right down. So I'll stress that even more. Please make sure if you're going to attempt this raised bed with wood, make sure you pack it tight. People are saying another disadvantage that would be probably rodents. It did happen to me once. I did come across voles in 1 year. But 1 year out of 6 years, I dealt with it, and there was no problem with it after that. The advantages are probably the water retention, I probably would say. I hardly have to water these beds at all. But being that you've got a large cavity below that being logs, you do have to be careful how you water. You do pretty well have to use soaker hoses at a slow drip because the water will go straight down. So I've actually invested a bit of money now, but you can buy a soaker hose on a roll. It's very inexpensive to run that system. And then from there, another thing I've gotten into a lot is intensive gardening. And I'm not sure if you've gone on YouTube a lot and researched intensive gardening, but there's a gentleman from the UK called Charles Dowling, and he actually practiced a no-till gardening, which is I find very interesting because every year now, what I do is when I prepare my bed in the springtime, so I've covered them in the fall with either dead leaves or dead grass, that's the most. When I prepare my bed in the springtime, I don't till it. I'll take my fork and I'll come down, I'll push down, and I'll pull back every foot or so just to put some air down there. And that's all I'll do. After that, I'll put maybe an inch of compost in, I'll rake it, and I'll seed directly into that. And it's been absolutely amazing. Because the whole idea behind that is that there is a symbiotic relationship that happens between your roots. It's called mycorrhizal fungi. Now, what it does, that mycorrhiza, it creates a relationship between the plant and other nutrients. So basically, what happens is that the mycorrhiza attaches itself to the plant, and it sends out hyphae, like fingers that go up. And those fingers are looking for water and nutrients for the plant. And in return, the mycorrhiza receives glucose as nutrition. So when you're tilling soil, you're destroying that whole system underground, and you're destroying the whole bacteria webinar. So it's something you want to actually seriously look into, is stop tilling your garden. There's no reason for it. Another big advantage of what I do is intensive gardening. Now, intensive gardening is something where a plant only needs a certain amount of square inches to grow, depending on the plant, of course. But say, let's take a carrot. A carrot only needs 3 inches to grow. So basically, when I grow in my garden, I'll put in a grid, 3 inches in each direction. So say my bed is 40 inches by 17 feet on top. I will put a grid in, 3 inches one way, 3 inches the other way, and I will seed inside that grid. So in that space there, I'm getting 700 carrots. Now I'll seed it, and I'll finish 2 carrots, and I'll wait till they're big enough to eat as a baby carrot. So I'll have 700 baby carrots, and the rest of the carrots, I'll leave that as they come along. Now, plants like that, you can actually sow that bed twice, because you've got enough time from the time you can actually put carrots in to the time you finish. You actually do have time for 2 crops. I have 2 crops of beets. I have 2 crops of carrots. I have when my carrots are dead, or I'm sorry, when my salad is gone bad and my spinach, also beets in there, and it's actually been amazing, absolutely amazing. Any other disadvantage to it? The major advantage is probably the heat it creates. There's heat created right from the beginning. So basically, you're planting earlier, because the heat between the interaction between the nitrogen and your logs. The logs, of course, is a home to thousands and thousands and millions of bacteria. Other than that, really, I haven't any problems with it. Well, like I say, probably things you could probably use for packing down in your soil would probably be, my neighbor is a dairy farmer, so I receive a lot of manure for him for packing my beds. I've gotten into making leaf mold. And that's really all about it, because there hasn't been a lot of studying done in this field. I don't believe there's a whole lot else to say, really. So with that, if anyone would have any questions, I'd be glad to take them. Evelyn?
Okay, Norm, thanks very much for your presentation on hugelkultur, and you also include a lot of other useful garden information, so thank you very much. Now, to close out the afternoon, I will be introducing you to Marilyn Dudek, who will be giving a talk on an agave cactus in her living room that suddenly decided to start blooming. Now, Marilyn is one of the original members of the Manitoba Master Gardeners Association and is also an avid gardener both at home and at her lovely cottage in Kenora. Now, just a final note before Marilyn starts her presentation. There will be an opportunity for questions from the audience after Marilyn is finished. So Marilyn, on to you.
Thank you, Evelyn. I'm going to share my screen. So if everybody is patient with me, because I have a PowerPoint to present. John, if you can help me, is it coming up?
It is coming up. So all you'll want to do is just press the from beginning button and you're set.
Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Okay, well, thank you also to Evelyn and the Prairie Garden Committee for inviting me to share my agave journey, which began in November 21 and sadly ended in November 22. I began with a little seedling, such as in this photo. I had been collecting succulents for many years before my agave, and they were all tender succulents, but nothing, the more rosetti kind. But fortunately, our son and daughter-in-law lived in the desert in Arizona for 15 years, and I became enamored with the desert and all that it had to offer. And of course, I studied plants and saw what was available. And of course, being the true gardener, I was looking for freebies. So it's either, seeds available or slips or anything like that. So I did notice on agave plants that once they bloomed, and nobody cut the stem off, like the many gardeners there are there, maintenance people, little plantlets formed on them. So I, of course, borrowed a couple and I grew them for a said family down there. And after they moved after 15 years, and they left those fully mature agave, although they weren't the marginata variety, variegated like the one I had. So the one I had, I purchased at just a large box store like Home Depot or Lowe's. And I like to patronize local nurseries, but I found it there. And then it grew to this full size over a period of approximately 15 to 20 years. And the full size was 3 foot by 3 foot. And over the years that we had it, of course, it grew and it started off going into pots, containers like this. And then, of course, it would outgrow that. So I put it in this was its permanent container, and it grew into the mature one that I showed you at the beginning. And in the other containers, you can see that there are other little ones growing, and they were all offshoots of the mother plant from the rhizotomous roots that are available. So I just sawed off with a serrated knife and planted them and shared them with many of my friends and garden club. But when we brought the plant in for the winter, as we did every year, and brought it into the sunroom because I couldn't take it down into the basement anymore, we did notice this center changing. The meristem was changing. We got quite excited, very excited. And then we watched that stem grow into a large peduncle. That's what they call the stem. And you'll watch it grow and grow, because you see it measured by the window frame, and then grow some more, 4 inches a day in 1 month. And if you notice on the stem, it's very asparagus looking. And that's what my grandson always said. Oh, Grandma, it's not an agave, it's an asparagus. And of course he was right, because it now belongs to the asparagus family, Asparagaceae family, where previously it was the lily family. So when it outgrew this corner, we had to move it into the center of the room with our 14-foot ceiling. And that's where it remained. So it took a month to grow this height. And then secondary peduncles began to form. And they became larger. And then at the end of the secondary peduncles, you could see that the flower buds were forming. I thought that these were the flowers, but then they formed into these larger buds, which you can see why the agave family belonged to the lily family previously, because it is very typical form of a lily bud. And there you can see the size comparison, and you can just see the little bit of stamens poking out as the buds open. And that is actually the flower. There's no, no big petals or anything. So you see the stamens coming out first and opening quite a lot. There's a close-up of them coming out. And then you can see they're fully coming out, all the stamens. And then the pistils arrive and they start poking out. And there, it's all fully open. And you can see how the pistils extend, and then all that, the stamens are drooping and they're maturing, because you'll see the heavy laden pollen on the stamens that, of course, is needed to fertilize the plant. But I did discover that the agave are not a self-fertilizing plant. So that meant some other pollinators would come along and pollinate it. And we did notice in the evening that there was a scent to the plant. So we thought, So I did some research and I discovered that bats or moths during the night come and pollinate the plant. Well, fortunately, I don't have either in my house. So I became the pollinator. Up on the 8-foot ladder, I climbed with my little Q-tip and pollinated, took the heavy pollen from the stamens and tapped it onto the pistil. There's a close-up of the pistils fully extended, and you can see how the stamens are diminishing and losing their viability. But the pollen on the stamens was very, very heavy. And actually the syrup coming and dropping off of the pistils was quite phenomenal, as it was off from the flower buds. So much so that this is how much of the pollen would drop onto the leaves of the agave. Not only onto the leaves, but onto the floor, of course. So it meant frequent wiping down with a damp cloth. And fortunately, we have a tile floor, so no carpet around it. And of course, I like to experiment. So I cut one off before it actually matured, and the pistil was just coming out. So you can see that there's exactly the formation of any flower, where you have the pistil leading down into the ovary, which would form the seeds, and then the stamens coming out. And you can see that the one stamen in the center doesn't have the fully developed or mature pollen, but the others do. And you can see on the black background how much pollen there is. And inside this flower casing, it is thick with syrup, hence why you have, I guess, it can be harvested from the agave plant, having agave syrup. So those flower pods matured and the pistil and stamens diminished. And then they started turning black. And actually you can see some of the non-matured pods, and they were falling off. But where they fell off from, you can see the new growth of the new plantlet, which would be identical to the mother plant. So here's an example of where the rhizotomous roots come off of the main mother plant. So where I would just take my serrated knife and saw it off. Not an easy job, but because those roots and everything and anything about an agave is tough. There are fibers, sisal fibers, hence that's where we get sisal, like string and fiber from. Very tough, very tough. And these come up all throughout the lifespan of the agave, because that's where I also had the other ones at the beginning of the show I showed. So as the plant matures, also the pods mature more and ripen, and those little plantlets on the ends are getting larger. So I like to, experiment again. So I climbed up my ladder and removed some of those little plantlets, and then also removed the mature pods to see, did it work? Was I really the good bat? And there it was. I cut open the mature seed pod, and very mature seeds were inside. This pod is very, very tough. I could have taken a hammer probably to it, but a knife wouldn't do it. I took my pruning shears and had to actually crack it open. I guess I could have used like a nut cracker for walnuts or something, but nonetheless, a lot of seeds. So I did seed some of them, and they did germinate, as you see in the foreground. And then in the background, that's just some of the agave plantlets that I harvested from the plant. I gave many, many more away. And I think in this lot, I was growing 45, and I still gave a lot away since during the summer, and to garden tours and garden sales. And so they keep on going. So when I saw that it was lengthening and there were a couple of leaves coming from the seedlings, I dug them out and I did plant them into containers. Now, being a non-self-fertilizing plant, the seed will not come true to the mother plant. So it's still an experiment, and we still have to see if they grow and mature to the mother plant. And there is the end of the plant. As it's fully matured, you can see the leaves at the bottom have totally dried, and as has the stem. So a year later, November 22, and my husband took the saw. We had to lay this down actually on the floor, and saw the peduncle off, and I kept it, and it's still in the garden. I didn't remove all of the pods, because how many pods do we need? So the squirrels enjoyed the seeds. They were up on it all the time. It still sits in my garden. The squirrels still crawl up it, although there's nothing left of any seeds. And we virtually had to my husband had to take a saw to this agave and say goodbye to it, because it had fully demised. But it continues on, and many people have plantlets from it. Many in this who's participating in this Zoom today, and so really it's gone, but it lives on. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. That was a fantastic presentation.
Thanks.
We've been getting a lot of positive feedback in the chat as well. So I'd now invite all of today's panelists to return, and we can answer some audience questions at this point. Now, I know we have a lot of questions about roses, so if there are any other questions from anybody else who might be viewing the webinar, please do feel free to just write them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll put them to the panelists as time permits today. So to start off, Mary was wondering, Barb, if you could speak a little bit about your process for propagating roses.
Um, there are I've seen online, of course. I think the most current one that everybody's looking at is putting the stem of a or stalk of a rose into a potato, which I haven't tried. I can tell you that growing from seed isn't realistic. Uh, Most of my propagations have been essentially because the rose bushes themselves have decided that they're going to give me extra rose bushes. So I found a couple of that are particularly useful for that because they keep going. They're the gift that keeps on going. One of them is my Hansa rose, and the other one is my Henry Hudson rose. So that's sort of self-propagating. We also have a rose that we don't know what it is. I call it it's tagged as escapee because it got out of the bed and kept moving. So I'm not really sure what it is. I haven't been able to find it. So it's just tagged in the garden as escapee. I have tags on all of my roses, by the way, so that I can try to remember what I have from year to year. But I haven't actually tried to formally propagate roses. I find the easiest thing to do is to get familiar with all the various nurseries. Maybe this is a good time to tell people that they're apart from the local nurseries. There's a nursery down in New Brunswick called Cornhill Nursery that ships the most amazing bare root roses. And they have some very antique roses and obscure roses you've never heard of before. And they're kind of a fun place to go browse. And the shipment that I got last year, the roses, once I potted them out and left them for 6 weeks, then planted them, I ended up with 4 incredibly beautiful rose bushes last summer from the shipment. But as far as propagating, all I can suggest you do is if you want to try the stalk of the rose in the potato, feel free to do it. And then somebody should contact me and let me know what happened.
Fantastic, thank you. Rita had commented that Cornhill roses are amazing for some heritage varieties. Now, there was a question also about roses. What is your opinion of Lambert Close as a hardy rose?
It's very hardy. I have 3 of them. They're 20 years old. They look like a very delicate little tea rose. They're one of the explorers that actually looks. It comes up as almost a replica of a European style of tea rose. But they're absolutely faithful. They're up every year and they bloom every year. I've had a lot of happy times with that rose. It's a beautiful shade of pink, sort of medium pink, favoring a little towards the bluish pink as opposed to the apricot pink. And it's a very pretty rose. And mine are 20 years old.
Very hardy indeed. And could you speak a little bit about what you might consider the most shade-tolerant roses?
I went to take a look up. First of all, our garden is actually on all 4 sides of the house, and the front of our yard is entirely in shade. I don't attempt to grow roses in full shade because I find that there's really very little that will do that. You get a nice green plant, but you won't really get roses. I can make a couple of suggestions for partial shade, though. One which is Hansa, which, as I just mentioned, is a super hardy rose, very fragrant. It likes to give you presents by moving around and sending off other shrubs, and it works in part shade. There's also I've got a list of them here. Blanc du Bout de Coubert, which is a very, very fragrant white rose, also works in partial shade. So does Carefree Wonder. I've tried that one for the first time this year. It's in a partial shade area. I picked that one up as a bare root from TNT Seed, so that's available locally. Both Hansa and Blanc du Bout de Coubert show up in the local nurseries, so they're roses that you can get your hands on relatively easily. Pink Grutenhorst is one of the German roses, and it is an absolutely beautiful little rose. It doesn't get too high, but it works in partial shade. Ballerina works. It's polyanthus, which means it's a rose that gives off little tiny flowers, but a lot of them. It's kind of cute. And I have a couple of David Austin roses that are specified as being good in partial shade, and I happen to have them. One is Alde Braithwaite, which I mentioned, my 20-year-old Alde Braithwaite, and the other one is Lark Ascending, which is a stunningly beautiful, relatively small number of petals, apricot rose that comes up every year. And it's just one of the most beautiful things you can imagine. There's lots and lots of other choices from the David Austin series, but as I've recommended to people, you may want to think about how much protection you want to try to go with some of the roses from that series as well. But a lot of the David Austin roses like partial shade because they're English roses. And they seem to like not so much of the hot, direct sun that we tend to get in our summers now. Hopefully that answers.
Perfect. No, thank you very much, Barb. Now, there's a few questions for you, Marilyn, as well. So one individual mentioned that a recording would be lovely of the agave plant to review the changes in it. And I will point out that this presentation will also be available on YouTube afterwards. So if you would like to see some of Marilyn's striking images, you can always revisit them that way as well. But Diane asks, Marilyn, I may have missed the beginning of your presentation. Where did you say you got the mother plant from?
The mother plant, I just bought it at a big box store, like Home Depot or Lowe's. And I don't usually like to shop at those places, but it so happened I wanted a variegated one and I saw it and it came home with me.
Fabulous, thank you. And an anonymous attendee was wondering, they weren't sure if you had mentioned the final height of the peduncle, but it would be interesting to share, as they point out, not all houses can handle that growth.
12 feet.
Oh.
So I had 2 feet to spare. And on studying up over this journey of a year, I had done research on it. And I don't know what greenhouse, like what conservatory, like a botanical garden, had it in their space. And they actually had to remove panes of glass from their greenhouse so that the flower could go right through. Fortunately, I didn't have to do that.
And was the plant from the U.S., Di? Was the plant from the U.S., Marilyn?
Well, I can't say that, can I?
Absolutely. Linda has reassured you that the pup you gave her last year is very happy and about 8 inches in diameter now.
Perfect. And I have to warn you, which comes in the article actually in the Prairie Garden, they're wonderful plants to have, but they're not easy to live with because on each one of those leaves, as you see, this is one of the offshoots of it. Not from this one, but I've been growing this one for a few years. Every one of those is a razor sharp needle. And every time we bring it in the patio door, and my husband would not be happy. And he tried giving it away to people who walked on the street because I had it up on outside. And I said, you can't give it away. You can't give it away. Well, then when it in this year, he absolutely fell in love with the whole process as I did. I mean, and I did share it a lot because it was kind of COVID time and we were doing a lot of Zoom. So a lot of people did witness it growing, and I'm happy to share the story with you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marilyn. So that is the end of our open questions at the moment. I'm not sure if anybody had a final question or if anybody on the panel wanted to ask one another question, you're welcome to. But otherwise, we could always invite, just a note of gratitude as well. Many thanks to Evelyn for her quality management and solid editorial direction of the 2024 edition of the Prairie Garden Year-Round Gardening, or C, from Sarah. So if there are no further questions, I'd invite Ian Wise, who is the chair of the Prairie Garden, here to offer a few more closing. Sorry, one more just before Ian. We have a question for Norm. Diane was wondering, how big is your garden plot?
My garden plot, right now I've got, well, I have 2 gardens. One's about the size of a football field, or 3/4 the size of a football field, that I use basically for squash and corn, watermelon, pumpkin, and raspberries. And on the south side, I've got what happened actually is during the flood, we had all these sandbags, right? From the flood. And I threw all these sandbags. Somebody told me, well, sand is good for clay soil, but it's not, because you have to have that mix between sand, clay, and silt, right? So I basically created a huge concrete slab out there and I was trying to grow in it. That bed is that garden to the south is probably, I'd say 40 by 80, I'd say. And right now I've got 5 of those raised beds in there. and I've got actually got some more cedar telephone poles, and it just so happens my nephew has a sawmill, so I've got a pile right now of 4x4s and 2x4s of cedar that I'm going to be making more raised beds with. I absolutely love it. I would never go any other way. Absolutely love hugelkultur. When you're feeling a raised bed, what are you going to put into it? More clay? Or you're going to go somewhere that's like Reimer Soils and pay $25 a yard? And why would you? I mean, you're putting something in there like this biomass of carbon and filled with nitrogen that creates an incredible environment. It's absolutely incredible. In fact, it becomes like a just gigantic sponge. Like my pepper plants this year, one of the pepper bed was about 17 by 4 feet. I don't think I watered once in at least 3 weeks. I probably wouldn't have had to water it. So the water retention is amazing. Plus, I've got a special thermometer that I use in the springtime, and it's actually surprising how much warmer it is in those beds before everything else is. It's wonderful. The only thing that you won't have, they do talk about, is that you won't have worms in there, because how are the worms going to get up there? Right? They have to crawl through the wood to get up there. But I have nothing but good things to say about it. I'm actually love it. I can't see other than it's really hard work. It's a lot of hard work. I find nothing negative about it. But I would definitely advise people to look into Charles Dowding. I know I've said it more than once, but he practices a no-till gardening, and I do the same thing. Like I said, in the springtime, I take my fork, I go down every foot, he gets the mirror in there, and he's big into composting. I use nothing else but compost now. Like I've said before, at first I was using your typical chemical fertilizer, then I went to organic for fertilizer, and I use nothing else except leaf mold and compost, and it's incredible. My gardens are incredible. I mean, my pea plants were like 4.5 feet tall. I mean, I'm growing carrots like a square like 40 inches by 17, 16 feet. I could grow like 700 carrots inside that cement. It's a wall of carrots, and they're huge. My beets, I grow them in a 4x4 inch square. Everything is done on an intensive. And what happens is when you grow that way, once it starts growing, the weeds, that's another thing that happens when you don't turn your soil that way, the weed seeds that are below ground will stay there, because a lot of weed seeds are inside your ground already. So when you're tilling them, not only are you destroying the web, the food web down, the soil food web down there, but you bring seeds up, right? So once, say, my carrots are like at a certain height, well, the sun's not going to hit anymore. So there's no more weeding to do. I hardly weed at all. And when I do have to weed, it's not a big deal. I'm standing up at it. You're standing up at it. It makes gardening an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. It's so much better. You're never on your knees. Nope. So yes.
Thank you so much, Norm. So at this point now, I'll invite Ian Wise, the chair of the Prairie Garden Committee, to come back and offer a few closing words.
Thank you very much, John. I hope everybody can hear me. As you probably gather from the presentations, and certainly wish to thank all the speakers. Tremendous job on your presentations. On behalf of TPP Publications, just to get an idea, the Prairie Garden is actually a nonprofit group, and we rely heavily on our members to actually put in a lot of volunteer work, a lot of dedicated work, and also the generosity from our sponsors in order to be able to publish this book. I just want to take the opportunity here, just briefly, just mention some of the actual some of our sponsors, as well as some of our dedicated volunteers who've been working with us over the past year to get this book into publication. Prairie Garden, as situated, the committee is made up of a number of different peoples who have a very eclectic background, where where we require everything from people who have a good understanding of gardening right through to whole aspect about a business, how to actually run a nonprofit organization, which is a kind of takes a lot people of a very business and financial background. And I'd just like to briefly mention our group is encompassing about 5 or 6 different actually categories, of which I like just to mention the individuals who've actually put their dedicated their time and effort towards the production of the book. We have a financial component, which is involved with Monique Grabowski. She's our bookkeeper, and Karina Cabalino was our treasurer. We have a marketing sales group, also in promotion. Rita Campbell's in charge of our sales group, while Mira Stina is part of our newsletter. And we also have a gentleman called Don Kinsler, who actually is he's from North Dakota. He's actually enabled us through his some of the reviews that he's had for the book, and including some mention of the Prairie Garden in his presentations throughout the state, both North Dakota and Minnesota. As we have now actually gone back, we usually had a bit of a market there, but now we're revisiting that. And I think in the future, you're probably going to see a lot more articles from North Dakota. And I think that's an opportunity in many regards since with the changing climate, well, we could actually foresee some of the potential changes we'll have in our province based on some of the articles that we'll be getting from that part of the Northern Plains. Editorial, you've met some of our editorial people. Evelyn Lundeen, this is her second book that she's has now been in charge, as well as Lisa Guy, who's our copyright editor. And they're the ones who actually, when you read the book, how you can see how the flow of the book is and how the articles are very similar in terms of how we want it kind of tailored a certain style so that all our customers can anticipate that when they read this book, they'll have the same sort of kind of pleasure in through it. It's kind of a case of both entertaining plus providing information. A couple of other people I like to mention are our technology group. Of course, technology is critical for an organization like this. We constantly have to keep updating. We have a web page. If it is our web page, this is actually a product from Joe Zhu, who developed that for herself, and Sarah Percy, who's our social media guru. We also have secretary, who's in charge of pretty well keeping us up to date in terms of notes and archiving all our documents. Brent Pools in that charge with that. 2 members at large, a couple of people who provide us lots of information over the course of time. I'd like to thank Bill Dowry and Indy Mitra. Also, we have what's called a group of associates will provide advice to us so that we can actually, if we need to get some technological expertise, we can go to them and ask people like Doris May Olton, Andy Takehouse, Warren Otto, Susan Simpson, and of course, most recently, Barbara Shields, who was at the talk. Graphic designer, this is about the only person we really have in terms of a contractor outside. And the graphic designer is kind of like the person who gets all our files and all our different our pictures and our articles, and he kind of puts it all together like a jigsaw puzzle. So you end up getting this kind of book, and this is the work of the graphic designer in terms of how it's laid out and how it actually looks in terms of in the book. And he's done a great job for us. It's the second year he's been working on it with us. And one other person I just like to mention, Susan Oliver. People might be aware, Susan's been with us for about 45 or 50 years, and she still contributes. She still writes articles. She's now in her 90s, but she's still very spry, and has been writing articles, I guess, for the Prairie Garden. I don't know how many articles she's written over the years, but they're countless. The other group I like to mention is our sponsors. And these sponsors are very generous and have been supporting us over the years. They're very critical in terms of any nonprofit organization in order to maintain its financial viability. I'd just like to mention we have 2 sets of sponsors. One on the back, you go look on the back book, right on the back cover, you'll see one group. This includes Aubin Nurseries, Jeffries Nurseries, Lindenberg Seeds Limited, St. Mary's Nursery and Garden Center, T&T Seeds, Tree Time, Vandermeer Garden Center. For a lot of our listeners out there, probably you might recognize some of these names, but these are the ones, if you have an opportunity to, patronize them once in a while when you're looking for various different gardening supplies, we certainly recommend that any one of these organizations. I think most of these are Manitoba based, but we do have some like Tree Time located out of Edmonton. Our second level is a group of our sponsors, which is located. If you open the book up, you'll see it's just on the last page of the book. These include Jensen's Nurseries, Kakenhoff Nurseries, the Lily Nook, Prairie Originals, Sage Gardens, and Shelmerdine. Of course, I'd be remiss not to give a big thanks again to John Taves, I guess, as the emceeing it, and also McNally Robinson. I believe this is the 33rd straight year, if I'm not mistaken, that we've actually had a launch through McNally Robinson. Prairie Garden feels extremely grateful to allow McNally to allow us to have these launches every year, and it's been I know from the Prairie Garden site, a real pleasure to be able to work with them. Once again, a big thank you to everybody, the speakers, and also all to the people who attended, and I hope you enjoy your book. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. It's such a pleasure to work with the Prairie Garden Committee as well on a regular basis and to stock this beautiful book every year in our store. So again, it is the Prairie Garden 2024 year-round gardening. Please feel free to visit us either in person or online, and we'll find a way to get a copy of this book into your hands. The only thing I will say otherwise is thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you all for your attention and for your questions and for your comments. And we'll hope to see you again for Prairie Garden 2025. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.